Benton Scholars class of 2020 took an incredible trip to various countries across Europe. We studied the world wars in class, and now we finally got to experience the history in person. There were so many exciting and fun moments. After all, at the end of the day, it was a completely free trip with friends. But at times there were also intense and deeply emotional moments as we saw the remnants of the horrors of war. Nonetheless, the blend of culture, history, and beautiful scenery made for a life-changing experience for me, and I managed to film throughout our time to show a glimpse of what the trip was like. Once everyone met up at the airport, we started our trip in France in a small town called Amiens. We began with a tour of the battlefields from the Battle of the Somme, the largest battle on the Western Front that had over 1 million casualties. We witnessed the physical aspect of war when we went to the Lac Niger crater in Albert and saw how war literally altered the landscape of the earth. Then we went to a memorial dedicated to the missing soldiers with no known grave. It was our first taste of the immense scale that memorials dedicated to the world wars had. The next day, our first stop was at Vimy Ridge. It was a preserved battlefield park, and what was fascinating was that the land was still dangerous because of all the buried explosives in the ground from 100 years ago that still detonate from time to time. So now they use sheep to maintain the grass. During our time in Belgium, we stayed in a little town called Ypres. Nicknamed the City of Peace, it is a major tourist center for history fanatics because of the town's significance as a central area of conflict between the Germans and the Allied forces during the First World War. One of the main highlights in Belgium was when we went on a bike tour of the various battlefields and memorials led by our guide Kurt. We even got to walk through the actual trenches where soldiers fought. Another amazing experience was the last posth ceremony at the Meningate Memorial. Every evening at 8 p.m., the citizens of Ypres hold a ceremony for those who gave their lives for Belgium in the First World War, and this has been carried on every day since 1928. We were able to partake in this historical tradition when Annalise, Colleen, and Sam, who all have ancestors that fought in the First World War, got the opportunity to lay a wreath to commemorate the fallen. It was unbelievable that we were all able to witness this. We spent a week in Berlin, and it was personally my favorite part of the trip. It was such a vibrant city filled with interesting people. After being in bougie Belgium, the food in Berlin felt so much cheaper. One of my favorite foods was doner, a Turkish dish with meat cooked on a vertical rotisserie and thinly sliced and placed in a pita-like bread. Berlin is known to be the doner capital of the world, so naturally we got a lot of doner. We even went to the most famous doner spot in the world. Academically, we moved on to exploring World War II, which was in many ways more emotionally draining. We went to the memorial for the murdered Jews of Europe, which I felt mixed about. It was powerful because its simple gray pillars felt haunting to walk through, and there wasn't a message that was in your face. It was just simply there. But the reason I didn't like it as much was the fact that the memorial was so open. There was no barrier that divided the memorial from the street, so there were kids running around and teenagers playing tag, which devalued the experience of it all. Yet the most horrifying experience was when we visited an actual former concentration camp in Sachsenhausen. It was so surreal to enter a place where less than 100 years ago, people were sent here knowing that they might die here. We walked through the gates that said work will set you free. Even though this was all over, I could still feel the amount of suffering and horror that went on here. Immediately, Russia felt like a completely different world. Our hostel that we stayed in was right on Nevsky Prospect, probably the most famous street in all of Russia. The first meal we had was in the supposed McDonald's of Russia, its most famous and popular fast food joint. It's called tirimok, and I had borscht there, which is Russia's signature dish, a beet soup with beef. Besides walking around and exploring the city, we also went to the Hermitage Museum, which was formerly the site of Peter the Great's Winter Palace, and it was probably my favorite part of Russia. The museum not only contains amazing artwork, but the building itself was incredibly beautiful. Another favorite experience of mine was when we took a boat cruise around St. Petersburg, and it perfectly ended with us watching the sunset. Besides all the fun touristy moments we had, we also learned a great deal about Russia's experience during World War II. specifically the Siege of Leningrad. We went to one of the oldest churches in St. Petersburg and met the head priest there, who has a museum in the church about the siege. He had such an interesting life and told us many stories. One in particular that stood out was when he told us about how he helped bury over 65,000 soldiers. We also visited a Soviet monument that was very romanticized, with patriotic music blasting throughout the place. It seemed to ignore the suffering during the siege and almost justified it. We ended our trip by visiting a cemetery filled with people who died during the siege. Like the Soviet monument, this place also blasted music to make the outcome seem triumphant. For a place that represents so much horror, it's ironic that we all felt so relaxed due to the music and the scenery. It further emphasized that no matter how hard we try to relate to the atrocities that happened during the world wars, we will always be disconnected.
Just all the time that I get to spend with like everyone else, socializing and just getting to know each other better, just getting closer to one another, like kind of like how we did during pre-orientation.
Just getting to see so many amazing places that I wouldn't have had the opportunity to otherwise. I think I've met so many interesting people and gotten closer to the Bentons as a whole, and I'm really grateful for that opportunity.
Speaking French in France, I studied French for a year at Colgate before we came here for just the 2 semesters. I had no French experience. I could actually understand a lot of it, and I was able to like communicate with people that didn't speak any English, and that just felt really good.
Definitely our dinner, the Georgian dinner that we had all together. I don't know, I just really enjoyed everybody's company and the good food. Surprisingly, I didn't know what I was going to get, so I really enjoyed myself at that.
I think my favorite part of the trip has been the people that we've met and we've gotten closer as a group, but also just being immersed in the culture and getting to know how different people live across the world, both in history and in the present moment has been awesome.
Getting to experience all the different cultures because they're so different from what I'm used to growing up in central New York. So being able to experience how other places live.
So my favorite part of the trip definitely has been the boat ride through St. Petersburg because we got to see so many different sights and we got to see beautiful pictures. Peter took really funny pictures and it was just fantastic.
Getting to know all of these fantastic people in a completely new environment because we all knew each other a little bit at Colgate, but putting ourselves in these different environments that we've never been in has really shown me different parts of people that I didn't really know as well beforehand.
Every place we visited had its own vibe, and I think every time we got to a new place, it was definitely like a crazy adjustment period, but as time went on, we got more familiar with the city and just being able to understand how every part of every place like worked and knowing the way that it ticked.
Definitely the bike ride because we definitely didn't get a lot of exercise going from cemetery to cemetery, so it was nice to like have a relaxing trip and to see exactly where the lines were and how close they were together and how like hard it was for them living in the trenches.
Seeing the overlap in each country that we visited, I kind of expected to have a different taste necessarily. Like within each country, I kind of thought that there would be a certain type of warfare more or less used, you know, like I would feel a distinct national feeling in each one, but it's really just made me realize that war is war regardless.
Definitely going to talk to the priest, Father V. He was kind of amazing with his stories, and he had such a kind and intriguing spirit and soul, and he had a wonderful aura.
I think Russia has probably been my favorite aspect of it. Just walking around St. Petersburg, because I think it was the part I was most scared about, because I was like, I'm not going to be able to read anything, but figuring out the Cyrillic alphabet has been really cool, and a lot of Russian grandmothers have been very nice to me on the streets.
France, I love France. It's a beautiful country, and I know the language, and I like the people, and the towns, the churches, the architecture are just gorgeous and beautiful, and I want to go back.
I would say bike riding through Belgian countryside has definitely been my favorite. I love nature, so it was wonderful to be experiencing another country in that sense. And of course, I loved seeing thousands of cows everywhere. So it was just a really fun experience, and I wouldn't take it back for the world.
Going through the Belgian countryside biking, as many of you know, I don't really exercise on a daily basis. I don't remember the last time I went to the gym. So that was a really great way to get exercise in and see a beautiful countryside. I also loved meeting different kinds of people all throughout the entire trip. Yeah, I loved all the food too. It was awesome.
Being in spaces that all of us have extensively studied, and having the opportunity to think critically and deeply about where we are, our role as people nowadays, and how these how these major events in history have affected the lives that we live today. And getting to do it with people who are so smart and adventurous and entertaining has been a real pleasure.
Seeing places that I've only read about in person and visiting those places with people that I really like spending time with. My colleagues at the university and students we've selected for the Benton program, it's really great getting some first-hand in-person learning.
Hi, my favorite part of the Benton 2020 trip to Europe was actually kind of a really big picture thing, and it was how elegantly it was designed by Nancy and John, and how everything sort of gave us all examples and much more in-depth ways to think about the stuff that they covered in class. And then watching the students make all those connections on the trip, and of course the 2020s.
The students, of course. No, really, I think it's been great having the interaction with the students and seeing their responses to places that one is familiar with, and understanding them in a new way through their eyes. It's been wonderful.
I would say the same thing, getting to know the students as real individuals, as people who ask profound questions and who see things that we don't see, and who make the places that we've been new and even more important for us than they were before we left.
At the end of the day, what really made this trip for me was the people that I was surrounded with. Sharing these moments, both fun and somber, with everyone was truly unforgettable.
Say hi, Jake. Hi, Jake.
How do we do? I'm scared.